Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 7 and looking at kind of how to manage conflict. So again, I'm going to break this lecture into this chapter into two separate lectures. This first one's going to be pretty brief, just kind of setting the stage for conflict and looking at the different sources of conflict. And then the next lecture will look at really learning objectives 2 and 3, looking at the different strategies that we can use to resolve conflict, and then also looking kind of more in depth to a specific strategy called collaboration. So when we look at the relationship between conflict and outcomes, we want conflict. We're not trying to avoid conflict by any means, because conflict can produce better ideas, better discussions. And so we do want to encourage conflict within our team, within our department, whatever it might be. But if we don't know how to manage the conflict, then it can have a negative impact on the morale of the group, on the outcomes that we're looking for. So we really, again, want to find this balance. Too little conflict kind of gets us into that group think, and we just agree with everything anybody's saying. We don't really analyze it too much, and that can lead to poor outcomes. And then again, too much conflict can lead to cliques, can lead to groups kind of breaking up. And again, that's not the point of conflict either. So we really want to try to manage it. And so this chapter helps us understand kind of the different sources of conflict and then the appropriate strategies to use. Just some general rules when engaging in conflict that we can really kind of think about and utilize. The first one is to work with more information. So the more information you have about something, the better. So you're not making assumptions, that you're doing a little research before you kind of draw any conclusions, making sure that you're basing your conclusions on facts and not just opinions. Look at developing multiple alternatives or multiple options or solutions, so you have that flexibility when you're in a conversation like this. Look at things that you do agree upon. So again, this helps us kind of start from a place that we all want a similar end result. We're all looking to improve the company, or we're all looking to meet a particular goal. Now, how we get there is probably the source of the conflict, but at least we can start knowing that we all are kind of aiming for a similar goal or a similar thing. If you can inject some humor into the process is good, just to helps, kind of relieve some tension at times. It helps us maybe put some perspective on some things. So again, that is a good suggestion, but making sure you do it at the appropriate times. Make sure that you're maintaining a balance of power, that no one's kind of dominating, no one's using their power, to intimidate or to force someone into a particular position. Even though someone might have more power, if we're truly trying to encourage conflict and encourage conversations like this, then if we kind of pull the power card, then that might, shut the other people down in the future, and they're just going to go ahead and agree with you, because if you don't, they know you'll just pull that power card. And so that's not kind of long-term what we're looking for. So you really want to make sure that you're maintaining a balanced power structure and really encouraging this conversation. And then try to resolve the issues without forcing a consensus, or not without forcing someone into choosing a particular side or a particular decision. Ideally, we want people to come to these conclusions on their own, and we just get more commitment and more ownership at that point. If you go back to the communication chapter, the supportive communication, you can really link a lot of what we're going to talk about today using the supportive communication in these strategies. So, making sure that we're focused on the facts and not the person, or this, making sure that we're, validating the other person and making this a conversation and not just someone dominating the conversation. So we can really utilize that supportive communication really in these types of conversations. So this particular lecture is going to look at the 4 sources of conflict, just some common sources that we might see in an organization. And then you can see at the top here that we have issue-focused conflict and people-focused. Ideally, we want our conflict to maintain an issue focus. When it starts being people-focused, that's when we start getting a little more defensive. We feel like we're being attacked. And so the conversations or the conflicts usually don't turn out as healthy as if they were more of an issue-focused conflict. So we'll go through each of the sources of conflict individually and pretty briefly here. But again, you can see that the people focused is kind of more in your face. It feels like someone's pointing the finger at you. It's more kind of emotionally charged. And a lot of times we're not going to change who we are. It's kind of the point of that. So when people are focused on kind of your values, it feels like they're attacking you personally, we're probably not going to make a lot of progress. But if we can stay focused on the issue at hand, we can maybe take that conversation a little further and maybe make some progress, because again, we're focused on the issue and not the person. And that becomes really important, especially in a conflict situation. So the first source of conflict is personal differences. This source of conflict is very common. It's becoming more common, most likely, in organizations because we're becoming more diverse. So as we become more diverse in our organizations, which is a beautiful thing, that naturally is going to cause personal differences. We have people from different countries, from different backgrounds, from different work experiences. They have different values, different needs, different perspectives, and those are all really good things for an organization, but at the same time can be a source of conflict. And so we want to encourage conversations. We want to encourage this type of conflict, in a sense, to learn from one another and get their different perspectives. But we also want to recognize that most likely we're not going to change someone's values. I have different values than my coworker, and it is what it is, but the more I learn about my coworker, the more I understand where they're coming from. I don't necessarily agree or feel like I need to change my values, but at least I have a better appreciation for where they're coming from, and we can kind of have those types of conversations, and it maybe helps me understand why they do other things. All right. And so again, learning about these differences is a really good thing, and it helps maybe eliminate or helps our understanding in future conflicts. Informational deficiencies is another source of conflict. So conflict evolves from misinformation and misunderstanding. So very common. This is probably one of the easier conflicts to resolve, because once I realize that this is the source of the conflict, I can get the correct information to this individual or explain better what I really meant if they misunderstood what I said. But anymore, this happens a lot because we communicate through, email or text message, and there's a lot left to interpretation, the tone, the meaning of some things. And so, again, it's very common, but a kind of an easier source to, once identified, to be able to resolve. The third source that the book talks about is role incompatibility. And so really this typically happens when two people are maybe working together, or they kind of rely on one another, but they have different goals that they're trying to accomplish. And so some conflict can stir from that because, I need this other person to do something for me, get something to me earlier, or I'm trying to kind of speed up the schedule or something. Well, my request, if they would do what I want them to do, would maybe prevent them from accomplishing their goal. Right. And so these goals, kind of compete with one another, and that can be a source of conflict because now, I need them to do this, but they can't because of logical reasons. And so this can be a source of conflict. And this happens probably more than we might realize, because we're so interconnected within the organization, which again is done. So we're not working kind of in these silos anymore. My role is, connected to someone else's role, and there's these dependencies that get created. But with that, we can have some conflict in this area as well. The last source of conflict is environmentally induced stress. So, conflict results from the stressful events of an organizational environment, the economy, the lack of resources, budget cuts, layoffs, all of these things, deadlines produce stress, and that stressful environment can definitely produce conflict. So, where a lot of times managers are asked to do more things with less money or less resources, less people, right? And that does produce a very stressful environment, and environment where conflict probably is more likely. So I think the important part about this piece of the lecture is recognizing, where does the conflict stem from, right? So really trying to recognize the source of the conflict before we start kind of resolving the conflict, because again, some are going to be easier to resolve than others. But once we recognize the source, then we can move on to a particular strategy. And that's what we'll talk about in the next lecture. All right, if you have any questions, let me know.